one thing that really struck me is one of the first letters Srila Prabhupada ever sent me was when he was in India. And I had that tremendous desire to take care of him when he came back. For those 3 weeks had really changed my life. Spending 3 weeks with him after he got out of the hospital, I really wanted to continue serving him in that way. And so the whole 6 months he was in India, I was praying to Lord Jagannath every day that if he comes back, please let me be his servant. Please let me cook for him. Please let me clean his room. Let me do anything. Just let me be near him. Let me serve him and be near him. This was my very strong desire. And so I got a letter from him. And in the letter, the last statement was, I know your mind. Just, I know your mind. One thing that I do remember very clearly was, he said this a few times when I brought the plate in, you know, and there would be sabji, rice, dal, chapatis. He would say that this is so amazing to me because when I was in India, everyone said, oh, Swamiji, don't go to America. In America, there will be no food for you. You'll starve. They eat only meat in America. Because back here, we're talking back in 25, 30 years ago, there wasn't that much interchange between India and America. So they would tell me, don't go there. And so I simply said, what is that? I shall live on bread and potatoes. And so I thought I would live on bread and potatoes, but now I see Krishna has sent everything. Dal, rice, chapatis, all sabji, everything. And he would say this quite like a number of times, how he was so amazed and happy that Krishna had sent everything, just as if he were in India. And but he thought that he was just going to live on bread and potatoes here. The night he had the stroke was a very traumatic experience. Jadharani and I were perched by the window looking in to the room. There was a window between his living room and his bedroom. You know, it was an arch window in New York. And he was very weak, and still he would have the boys, Satsrup or Brahmananda or whoever was there, they would take turns. They would sit him up and open the Bhagavatam, and he would continue teaching and continue reading the story of Prahlad Maharaj. Even though he was, I'm saying he was apparently suffering, or he was apparently at a very critical time hovering between life and death, he didn't care for that. All he cared about was, he only cared about teaching us. And I never saw such selfless love. I was deeply affected at that moment. I realized a lot of things. I saw really pure love. I saw how much he loved us, and I realized that he wouldn't be with us very long. And I made a vow that I would do everything I could to take care of him and help him and do whatever I could to make things easier for him. I know once when we were in New Jersey, a funny thing happened. We used to sit and all eat. He would sit on the sofa and he would eat on a little table in front of the sofa, and we would sit on the floor and we would all eat there. And we'd talk about different things during the meal. And so I remember one time we were talking about brown rice, white rice, long grain rice, this rice, that rice. And I was, and he was saying how his servant, there was one servant that he had that didn't like the long grain fine rice. His taste was for the lesser quality rice because that was his taste, you know. And then we were talking about, he was saying how brown rice is for the animals. And so I said, well, I must be an animal because I really like brown rice. And he just laughed. He just laughed and laughed and laughed because it was such a simple, it was really done in a mood of simplicity, you know, but he really thought that was funny. Oh, well, in the very beginning, in New York, before he got ill, he had us working on a story of Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu. And so he was describing to us, he was really keen on having this into a slideshow for children. And this was his vision, which eventually manifested. And so he had us working on this, and he would tell us all about the poses. He would pose. He posed for Hiranyakashipu on one leg, and he used to pose for Lord Nrsingadev, and he loved to pose for Lord Nrsingadev. He would come in at least once a day and do a roar. I mean, he would come in and describe how Lord Nrsingadev, and his eyes would get big, and you could see the white up above, coming out of the column. This was his delight. He enjoyed this very much. And once Jadharani had him pose, he wrapped a dhoti, a white dhoti, and then into a threefold bending posture, so that we could see how the pleats fell. So he posed like Krishna. And he was very, he was right there watching us, seeing what we were doing. He would come in and see how we were doing it. And once I had these, there was this picture of Prahlad sitting in the boiling oil. And so I had to, come up with some demons. Like I didn't know what demons were like. So I think I probably dug them out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, this. Somehow I got these demons in there. And so I asked Prabhupada, after I did them, got them drawn in, were they okay? And he says, oh yes, this is very good. And he says, there are such demons, they're like this. And he is saying, yes, even on this planet, there are such demons. And I said, oh, really? I didn't know that. And he looked at me and he said, there are a lot of things you do not know. I remember Achyutananda was in India at that time, that we were in Montreal. This one just comes to my mind. Achyutananda was in India at that time, and he was there with a young brahmachari named Brishikesh, I think. Can't remember what his other name was. Anyway, somehow or other, this boy had gone to the ashram of Ban Maharaj and taken reinitiation from Ban Maharaj. And Prabhupada was extremely upset. I didn't really understand why, but he explained to me, he said, of course this boy is an American boy. This American boy is a fool. He doesn't know anything. It's not his fault. He's just a foolish youth. But Ban Maharaj, he is responsible. He knows that this is, what he is saying by doing this is he is saying that I am not a bona fide spiritual master. So he was extremely upset by this. I actually had never seen him that upset, because it was dealing with a kind of Vaishnav etiquette that I didn't really understand. Harsharani wrote a poem and sent it to Prabhupada. And I, of course, would open his mail and sit there and read his mail to him. And this poem was pretty bizarre. It said, I offer my humble obeisances to my spiritual master, who is, I'm just the gist of it, who is continuously running here and there, playing hide and go seek with Krishna and the cowboys, who is always absorbed in hide and go seek and leapfrog, and describing so many cowherd, so many Leela pastimes. And Prabhupada was sitting there and says, she has become advanced. Publish this poem in Back to Godhead. And it was printed in Back to Godhead. There was no way to get into the Mela because there were 20 million people there. There were no train reservations. You'd have to have your own helicopter. And there were no buses. It's like people were coming in, lying on top of trains and stacked against the walls of trains. And his doctor had said that he couldn't fly, and the devotees didn't want him to go, but he was determined. He was going to go to Kumbh Mela. Everybody told him not to, but at the last minute he made his own decisions. And so miraculously, there was one sweet Indian gentleman named Mr. Gupta who had just joined about 2 months prior. He just happened to be the chief engineer of Indian Railway. And so what he did was he added 2 cars to the trains. This is not done in India. I mean, totally unheard of. But he added a first-class car, and he added a second-class car. And he, not only that, he arranged that Prabhupada's car was freshly painted and there were garlands hanging in it. And he arranged for his personal servant to go with him into the Mela, to drive with him. And we had just given our money, you know, I was traveling with Kusha and her 3-year-old son, and we gave our money to Mr. Gupta. We didn't know, but we had a coupe right next to Prabhupada's. And then while we were on the train, it dawned on me, he told me he was going to take me to the Mela. And here we could, you know, it was the coupe right next, you know, his coupe with his sannyasis and brahmacharis he was traveling with, and then the next coupe. They're like little rooms in Indian trains, where we could hear him talking at the stops. And sometimes we would take grapes or take mangoes or things into them. And of course the train stopped outside the Mela, because the train station during Kumbh Mela is a nightmare. It's just like, you know, they're usually a nightmare anyway, but they're more of a nightmare with thousands of people. And so we stopped outside Allahabad in the dark, and we got off the train, and Hansadutta's buses picked us up. And of course Prabhupada's car was there, and then we drove into the Mela in that way. And then while we were in the Mela, Prabhupada was wanting milk. There was no way to get milk. So I talked to Mr. Gupta, and Mr. Gupta arranged for a cow to be brought to our compound in the Mela so that Prabhupada could have fresh milk. Mr. Gupta was wonderful. He really arranged for everything. And then he arranged for a train to pick Prabhupada when he was ready to leave the Mela. From the Mela, he went to, I can't remember whether he went to Calcutta or Bombay. Anyway, he left the Mela. They picked him up outside this train station. In other words, they made a special stop for the train. 2 cars were put on the train from Bombay, all the way, empty cars all the way, to pick him up and then take him out of the Mela. I mean, this is just like, in India this would be considered a miracle, because, I mean, the roles of bureaucracy just to get a train ticket. If anybody's been to India, they know. But to have 2 whole cars put on just for him, you know, and because there was no other way he could travel, he couldn't fly. In New Jersey, we were sitting in the garden one day, and there was a slug. That's an ugly thing. You know what a slug is? It's an ugly thing without, like a snail without a shell. And it was crawling there right next to him, and I said, ooh, look, you know, I was a kid. And he said, he got this look of tremendous compassion on his face. And he said, chant to the poor creature. And so he had me sitting there chanting to this slug, you know. And now I still chant to slugs, because I remember Prabhupada telling me to chant to the slug, and when I chant to slugs now, or little insects or whatever, I know that this is one of his instructions, that we're given this human form of life, and we can chant, and they can't, but the soul can hear. The tree can hear, the bird can hear, you know, everything. And this is, we would sit outdoors, and he would talk like this. I can remember once he was talking about 2 butterflies that were flying together. And he's saying, just see, there's family life also in the butterflies, you know, you know. And we were on the beach in New Jersey, and there are little ants on the beach and stuff, you know. And he was saying, they say there's no life on the moon, but here on the beach we see there's life. There's life in every part of God's creation. It's continuously seeing, constantly viewing the world through vision of Krishna Bhakti. There's no, I mean, there was never any time that he wasn't. And then he went on to describe the abominable snowman, how the abominable snowman is a big demon, you know, living in the mountains with big footprints, and how there are all these various entities in the deep in the ocean and up in the mountains and in the dark jungles of Africa. There are all kinds of things. You know, when you're fresh out of school, you think the scientists that everything that's there has been discovered, and it's all been taught in History 101 or Anthropology 202 or whatever. But he made it very clear that that's not the way it is, that there's a lot of things that we didn't know about. And of course we accepted that, you know, his view of the world. But it was just very interesting to see the things that he would come up with. In Hawaii once, there was a couple who came to visit him, and this particular devotee was very good at making, he was a sculptor. He had helped me make some deities, and Prabhupada wanted him to make some deities, I think Panchatattva deities. He went on and on to explain to him how he wanted him to do it and so forth, and spent quite a bit of time explaining it all to him. And then after the conversation, the boy asked him if it was okay for his wife to make silk, to kill the silkworms to make the silk. And Prabhupada was like, after they left, he was saying, these Western boys are so creative. Next they will be asking me if they can kill cows to make mridungas. I can remember one of the most persistent memories is the sand crab story. And this took place in Hawaii many years later. But again, we were walking on the beach, and he was talking about the sand crabs. There's these little white crabs that as you walk down the beach, they run and hide in their hole. You know, they run sideways. You've seen them, I'm sure. And he went on and on for days about the sand crabs. And what he was saying, finally it dawned on me that he was saying that there is no such word in the Vedic, in Sanskrit or in the Vedic text as instinct. That instinct, why is the sand crab running? This is the kind of conversation. Why is the sand crab running? The sand crab is running away due to instinct, they would say. His instinct is to go into its hole. But he was saying that there's no such thing as instinct, that instinct is a word that's been coined by the scientists to cover up for the fact that there's supersoul, there's God, and there's past experience. And he went on and on to explain this in detail, and finally it dawned on me that I've been taught Darwinism all my life. And I didn't even know it. Even though I've been a devotee for, at this point, maybe 8 years or whatever, 7 years or something, that Darwinism is what we're taught in the schools. We're raised this way. We were raised to think that everything is operating on instinct. The birds are doing this, the beasts are doing this. But Prabhupada was like blasting this philosophy day after day with this explanation. He went into detail with me. He said, supposing, he asked me, supposing you know where's the privy. The privy is the bathroom. It's just in there. Now, supposing you come into this house 20 years from now. Because you were here 20 years ago, you know the privy is there. Similarly, you've been in the body before, many lifetimes, so you know that as soon as you open the eyes, you look for the mother's breast. The little animal is nudging for the mother's breast. So similarly, it's the past experience, the past lifetimes, and it's the guidance of the supersoul within the heart that guides the living entity. It's not instinct. There's no such thing as instinct. Instinct makes no sense at all. It's a word. What does instinct mean? It means nothing. And if you stop and think about it and you analyze it, you see it means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And yet the scientists have convinced everyone that the whole of nature is moving by instinct. But the whole of nature is not moving by instinct, it's moving by supersoul. You can throw food outside and within 20 minutes the birds will be eating it. And they'll say it's instinct. But it's actually the supersoul is guiding them, oh, there's food. You know? And so this is the kind of talks that he would get into. When we were living in Los Angeles, when he would take his nap, I would usually sit and read Chaitanya Charitamrita. We had a copy that was translated by some scholar that Govinda had gotten. It was like 7 little volumes. And we would sit and, I would sit and read it, or Govinda would also read it too, and while he would take his nap. And so he would come in and he would say, oh, what are you reading? And we would say, this is Chaitanya Charitamrita. And you know, he saw that we were really interested in this book, Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so he decided that he would translate it also and make a good translation. And so he engaged Govinda in the transliteration work. And I started typing the, transcribing the tapes for Chaitanya Charitamrita, because he wanted to give us that since there was he could see it, we were very eager to read it.
But
One thing I was thinking, he was sitting on the rooftop of the Honolulu temple once, and getting a massage, I think by Srila Kirti. And the rooftop of the Honolulu temple faces the back of Nuuanu Valley, which is very beautiful. It usually has a rain cloud about the color of Krishna, and it usually has a rainbow, one or two rainbows. It's a very beautiful, beautiful area. And so that day there was a rainbow, and he became very poetic, and he started talking about how the rainbow has the three colors of the material nature, the red for the passion, and the yellow for the sattva gun, and the blue for the tamagun, and how all the modes of nature are coming from these three colors, just like on the artist's palette, red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors, and all the other colors are made from those. He was saying how these three colors in the rainbow, these three colors of those three gunas, all the various mixtures of gunas the living entities are coming from those three. It was very poetic and very beautiful. I have one photograph at home of Prabhupada sitting and holding a globe and turning the globe around. It's a color photo, and he's saying, Brahmananda will go here, Gargamuni will go here, describing, he's just turning the globe and at all the countries. And here we are, a handful of teenagers, mind you, who can't even get it together, don't even know how to brush their teeth or whatever, and he's got it all in his mind with this globe that he's going to send us all over the world and open centers all over the world. And he was extremely interested in Russia. He always talked about Russia, and he always wanted that Russia should receive the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. Jehovah Witnesses came to visit once in Los Angeles, and so Prabhupada said, let them in. So I let them in. And they sat and they talked with him in his room, and they were preaching, their philosophy. And apparently they believe that within this body, I don't really know their philosophy that well, but within this body you will become liberated, and this body's eternal. And Prabhupada kept asking him, with this body? With this body? Like he was just incredulous that they could actually believe that this body was eternal. And so, but he was very polite to them and very nice, and he didn't really preach to them. He just wanted to know what they're teaching here in this country. And so then as they left, he had me give them a little brochure. There was a drawing of the universal form that I had made, and it was a little brochure describing Chant Hare Krishna. It had a picture of Lord Vishnu on the front with all the arms. And so he asked me to give them a copy of this as a gift, because I think they gave him some literature too. And then the next morning, whenever he went out on his walk, he saw that it was on the street, had been run over by a car. And he was really disturbed, and he said, oh, we should not give out such freely. He was distressed that the Lord's picture had been run over by the car. Well, no, it was later that day he was talking about how the Western boys and girls, oftentimes, they go to the other side. The problem is they go to the other side. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, what do you mean by the other side? You mean back the way they were before? And he said, yes. Because he was talking about how some sannyasis had left and become as, the tendency when devotees stop doing devotional service is they go to the lifestyle that they were living before they were a devotee. So he's saying they go as they were before. And I said, so you mean they go back like they were? And he said, yes. Therefore, many of them will have to take birth in India to finish their Krishna consciousness.
What?
And before going back to Hawaii, he began to speak about compassion. And when he would speak about something, you would experience it. It was like a transmission or something. And he began to speak about compassion, and he began to speak about how his eyes were closed and there were tears running down his cheeks. And he was saying, people are suffering in this world. He was expressing divine compassion for all the souls suffering in this world without Krishna consciousness. And he was saying, please go and teach them. tell them about Krishna, give them this knowledge, because they are suffering. They don't know they're suffering, but they are suffering. And he became in such a mood of compassion that tears were coming down his cheeks, and he was just showing how much love that he had for all the jivas in this world who don't know about Krishna.
Je anilo